go. All right, well, it's great to be here with you, Carmen. It's so lovely to see you again. I always enjoy our conversations.
I do too, Justin. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a wonderful community.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And definitely everyone in our community, at least, is very excited for your new upcoming book. I keep getting messages about it, people saying, when is it out? When are we going to have it? All of this. So I'm really glad. And everyone's really excited for it, I have to say. I don't think I've heard anybody else's book be talked about so much before it comes out. Everyone's excited. And today's the launch, is that right?
Today is the day. I'm nearly levitating, just to tell you, because in spite of the fact that Brother Lawrence has the most amazing prayer practice, as you have said before, and as he says in the book, it doesn't suddenly make you, quote, holy or totally calm. So I'm totally, as my optometrist says, nerve-sighted. So it's good to see you today, because you're such a brother to me that it's like, a conversation. This is grounding, So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I hope it can be grounding. We'll just have a casual conversation. No need to be anything other than chill.
Chill is good.
So I wanted to ask you, what first attracted you to Brother Lawrence? I noticed that there's a lot of similarity in themes between his work and the Cloud of Unknowing. Did working on one lead into the other for you?
That's really such a good question. And yes, absolutely. I sometimes think of the Cloud of Unknowing with Anonymous, who I sometimes think of as, kind of the spicy cat of the two, because Anonymous kind of says what's on his mind. And then you have Brother Lawrence, which is kind of like the chill cat, but they are so similar in they're cut of the same cloth spiritually. Yes. And what I love about Brother Lawrence is it's kind of like the Cloud of Unknowing to go. So it's kind of like you roll through the drive-through and Brother Lawrence says, here, you can have this to go. And it's it's actually a very healthy, if you could get a very healthy meal that way. And yet I've never had like a grand plan or anything. So mostly what's happened is that I've had tugs at my heart. And so for my own healing, first of all, and working with wise spiritual words really does help me heal. And I don't really do it I don't think intellectually, if I translated the cloud, that would be healing. It's more like how you find yourself eating a meal, but you might not necessarily have said, I think I'll have this and this and this. It's just like you're eating, and it's a very much a instinctual thing. So for me, I was led to the Cloud of Unknowing that way. I first met it in an anthology at graduate school, and then I kind of forgot who it was. And later, when I was in real need of kind of some certain kind of prayerful healing, I was like, what was that book? And I was like, and it was the Cloud. And then for Brother Lawrence, I didn't think, well, I've translated the Cloud and now translate Brother Lawrence, because I actually read Brother Lawrence when I was very young, just in snippets. A lot of us meet Brother Lawrence, or at least I did, in snippets, like he's quoted a lot or he's in devotionals. But really it was my editor, Lil, and she was saying, here are some different books that might be good to translate if you just want to consider them, see what you think, back in April of 2020. And at the end, she said, Brother Lawrence, and something in me tugged my heart. And then I thought, well, I'm not going to commit to this, because what if his theology isn't healthy enough? Because to translate somebody, it has to be a really healthy theology, a healthy meal, because you get so intimately involved with their words. But it ended up being, I had never seen Brother Lawrence before, because he talks about how we harm each other, how we harm ourselves, and that separates us or makes it seem to us that we're separated from God. And he uses words like tomber in French, which means to tumble, but actually also means to stumble. So he doesn't have these like categories of binary or dualistic of like sinner, saint. It's more like human stumbler. And I find that very healing for me. And then he's just so down to earth. He wasn't privileged. He was in the 98% of the people who were at the bottom of the pile, the almost quote unquote nobodies to society then. So he had no education. The cards were stacked against him. And then he was disabled in war and in pain every day. So he had 10 years of a dark night of the soul. And through that time, he prayed, even though he didn't see immediate results, which always gives me such great hope. And then after that, he says that the practice of the presence, this returning to love in micro moments of prayer, is easy. But he also says, he sounds like Richard Rohr. He also says, but at first it can be extremely hard. So it's like a habit thing, like Teresa of Avila, who he quotes, always says, you will grow accustomed to it. The way my friend Mirabai Starr translates it so beautifully. He says, you will become accustomed to this. So it's like Father Richard Rohr says, it's that easy and that hard. So it's like a habit, like flossing your teeth is what I always think of. Like I can't go to sleep at night without flossing my teeth. But at first it was a hard habit to come up with. So it was more that I got a tug at my heart when Lil mentioned Brother Lawrence. And then I went into the National Library of France. Thank you, universe. Thank you, National Library of France, for having the 1692 and 1694 books and 1699 for free online. And then I started translating his spiritual maxims, Brother Lawrence's, and his letters, because that's, you know how it is. It's like in the letters and somebody's writings is where you really meet them. And then later I read his friend, Priest Joseph, conversations that they had, and his eulogy and some other things. But what I found in Brother Lawrence's writings, I fell in love with him, in the way of like, it was the beginning of the pandemic and I needed calmness in my life, the kind of calmness that makes no sense. Because every day I was teaching full time and one student had a parent to die. Another student had an uncle to die as essential workers in the pandemic. And then one of my very best friends, her father died in the pandemic. And then there was around the world this collective death happening, and there were no cars on the road, just birdsong. And so I was, every morning I got up at like about 4 or so, and there was Brother Lawrence, calm, just so calm. And it wasn't the kind of calm where you dislike someone for it, like where you think you're annoyingly calm. It was the kind of calm that he had earned, the kind of calm that he had worked through his own severe anxiety, which I also have lived with my whole life. And he had worked through his possibly post-traumatic stress disorder from his war years and disability and trauma. So it was really, I mostly just kind of go according to the tugs. But I do absolutely am so grateful for Anonymous. You're so wise, Justin, as always, to point out the similarities, because really and truly, if you take a bit out of one book and a bit out of the other book, they make the same notes, they make the same resonances, the same vibrations, and I love them both dearly. Even though I've never, officially met them, I feel like I have. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it does beautifully. Yeah, yeah. And I guess you've met them as well as anyone living today can. Being right in there, writing, translating it. So
it does feel that way. You don't realize it. You don't set out and go, oh, I'll have an experience with this wise dead person. But they stop seeming, dead. But it definitely is a experience when you translate someone. It definitely is. They do translate you. That's the sneaky thing. If you can. I always think of it from what my friends tell me who are counselors and therapists or spiritual directors, how they have to get out of the way. And I know this a little bit as a teacher, where you try to get out of the way to listen to the student. But definitely with translating, the goal is, or the hope is, or the exercise is, to try to get myself out of the way to make room for Brother Lawrence to speak into the present moment faithfully and accurately is the hope. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I think that's probably a perfect segue actually into my next question, which you were talking about getting to know him through translating. But while I was reading your introduction, I loved your image-rich description of the world in which Brother Lawrence lived. It really sort of transported me back in time. I got the impression that this immersive and imaginative exercise was a little more than just a writing style for you, maybe. It felt much more like a guided meditation, at least to me. A guided meditation which seems to explore the spiritual transformation of Nicholas Herman, a common sort of man, into Brother Lawrence, who embodies the profound simplicity of Christ. So yeah, my next question for you would be, how has exploring the context of Brother Lawrence's life itself been a spiritual practice for you?
Nobody has asked me that question. And I think your question is so profound that just your asking it almost doesn't need an answer. I mean, truly, it is that good of a question, because I don't know if I could have asked it myself of myself. So I'm glad. So thank you, Justin, for asking it. Because what happened was, I really wanted to know. I so met Brother Lawrence's spirit in his words that I wanted to know him as a person more and fill in the sort of the gaps of my understanding. So I wanted to know not only about his life, but his context historically. And it was like falling down a rabbit hole in the best of ways. And what I found out, I mean, you find out how many books online are free, and you know how many you can get on Kindle for a pretty cheap price, like Jeffrey Parker's History of that Century and such. So I just find that I found out that all of a sudden, when I started thinking of Brother Lawrence, I had never met him before when I read him in snippets. He had come across to me, and I'm sure it was partly my approach, but it was also partly that I met him in snippets. But he seemed romanticized. He was like sort of like a guru or a starets, which he was in some ways, but I don't really think that they're as helpful descriptions as others, which are, he was a man who prayed. That seems to me the most helpful. And then to understand, what does it mean to be this man who prayed at this time? So when I found out, I didn't even know this. You know, just because you found out something doesn't mean you went into it knowing it. So the fact that there were climate crises then, the Little Ice Age, and Paris flooded and all those kinds of things, and there were such famines, I knew there was inequity. I mean, you had King Louis the 14th. But then also just the fact of the wars, and the very war is never anything but cruel, but the heinous, reading the descriptions of the war. But then finding out about how Brother Lawrence wrote, I knew some of this, but wrote, you know, with a quill pen, probably from a goose feather, since he was more down to earth. Probably Joseph had maybe a swan feather or something. But the way that he, and used oak gall ink made from little knots on the trees and stuff. And then how that handwritten manuscript was taken to a printer shop, and how there were aspects of the printer shop that were loud and noisy. And just of all, first, that Brother Lawrence didn't want to be published. He didn't hardly want people to see his work too much. He was just living a hidden life. He was kind of like the anti-Instagram influencer. You know, he was definitely living a hidden life. But the fact that because of the friendship with Joseph, the book was published, that was the first thing. But then to find out that, to study the printing process, and to find out that they had these mechanisms where they would stamp out, you know, the ink onto the type, onto the fonts and such, and that they would soak that leather in urine to keep it soft so they could reuse it. Just to have this feather was needed, this knot on the tree, the wasp that made the knot on the oak tree, the urine from a sheep, the sheep skin itself, the whole thing. And the way Brother Lawrence practiced his presence tied to washing the dishes in the monastery, which he did not like to do. I mean, it says he had an aversion. Aversion means to turn away from, meaning not he's in the kitchen starting off whistling and aren't I holy, but more like he started off in the kitchen grumbling, going, ugh, why am I assigned to this? You know, and he's limping. He's in pain. So, and he did this job in the kitchen, different jobs in the kitchen, cook and all, for 100 or so brothers for about 40 years. And then he became the sandal repairer. And we think of sandal repairing, we think of kitchen work, it's messy. It's like you work really hard, you put the food out there, it's gone, you know, and then it's messy. And you think about a sandal repairer, and people's feet smell, and sandals smell. And the fact that he tied his practice of the presence to stirring soup and such like that. Yes, Brother Lawrence drew me in. I give him all the credit for having such a spirit chiseled or spirit exercised selfhood, true self, that you can't help but when you come in contact with him, it just changes you. I can't explain it, but I say that I translated him, but he really did translate me. What I hope is to make reading the book as much meditation as even the practice of the present. So I'm hoping that because for me, reading his original writings was meditational, because he's just, everything he does is of a piece. So for him, we often talk about praying without ceasing, the Bible verse, but we rarely get to really meet someone like that, but he somehow did it. He lived a hidden life, and washing the dishes was prayer and worship for him. And he had a genuine, I can imagine sometimes he said things to God that were very raw, because he says that. He says, you'd be surprised what people say in these little mini conversations with God. And I take it to mean, yes, you express gratitude in these mini prayers. Yes, you ask for help. And yes, sometimes you're just like, why did that person cut in front of me driving, to work? That and more. So you're very wise about that. For Brother Lawrence, there's no spiritual / secular. There's no sacred / secular. There's just, he really shows us that the binary is a figment of our imagination, a construct that we do well to reimagine life beyond that. So that's a good, really, really, really good question, Justin. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And it's a really, really, really good answer. So thank you. And it also leads super well into my next question. We seem to be on a roll in that sense. So my next question was that as I was reading through the book, I noticed that Brother Lawrence talks often, not just once or twice, but he talks often about turning away from created things. And that's like just turning away from created things towards God. And yet, like you just described so wonderfully, he lived this very embodied life. He found God in manual labor. He was working in the kitchen. He was fixing sandals. He wasn't off in an ivory tower somewhere. So do you think there's a balance in his thought between loving creation and not becoming attached to it? Or how would you interpret his instructions to let go of everything created?
That's a good question too. I think it's very echoing with Cloud of Unknowing's, the cloud of forgetting that you put between yourself and all created things. It's more letting go of attachments so that one can enter into this communion, but it doesn't disconnect us from the world. That's the thing. In fact, it connects us even more with the world, but just in a different way that's beyond the binary. So that's my answer to that. It's more a focusing on love. And so letting go of attachments, like you simply let it go. It can even be seen in the welcoming prayer or the welcoming practice where you say, I welcome, but it's also a letting go. When you say, I welcome this feeling, this uncomfortable feeling, I welcome the love, but to welcome things, we have to let go of whatever's in the way. But in letting go or in forgetting about the created things, it doesn't mean that we forget, oh, there's an egret I see right there, but it is a letting go of our attachments, because we have so many attachments. I was talking with Lama Yeshe Rose the other day, and she was talking about how very Zen Brother Lawrence is in the respect of this attachment, of letting go of attachments, and in that way entering into this divine, really, communion, and then having deeper interconnectedness. I'm not sure I can explain it further than that. It's almost, to me, something that is much easier to experiment and to experience than it is to describe. And I'm not saying I have the answer on it, but I definitely know every morning when I get up, I think today's another day for spiritual experimentation, in the sense of, as Paula Darcy says, God comes to us disguised as our life. So every day I think the spiritual experiment is, how do I make this, like the fact that I got up at 3:30 this morning out of nerve-sightedness, how do I turn that into the path? How do I let go and forget about created creatures in order, though, to realize my interconnectedness more with the divinity, with you, with all others, and with myself? So yeah, that's a good question. That's a deep question.
Yeah, and I love your answer. I think you're right on with that. I mean, when I think about turning away from created things, there's something, as you said, about attachment, and I think attachment is exactly the right word there. That it's when we become attached to created things, and when we become attached with our own sort of prejudices and all that. You know, we have a certain expectation of how life is supposed to go, and then
Yes.
it's not how it goes.
Yes.
Right? Life never
Yeah.
goes according to our expectations.
No.
So when we
No.
let go of those attachments and we just are in the presence with God, I think it allows us to be more present into the world, because in the sense we're letting God control the created things instead of trying to control them ourselves, you might say.
Yeah. Agree. I totally agree.
Yeah. And it makes me think, the last question I had for you here was as I was reading through, it's a bit of a personal reflection in a way. But I was thinking about this practice of the presence and different ways to do it. And it made me think about when I was, as you know, I spent years studying with an Ojibwe elder, an indigenous elder. And one of the things that he would always do, and all the elders do, and which they taught me to do, was to carry around a bag of tobacco with you everywhere you go. And you would lay down offerings, at different points in time. And my elder,
Yeah.
there was something super charming about it. He'd see a rock and he would just fall in love with the rock, and he'd put tobacco down on it. And you'd see a beautiful sunset and you put down tobacco, or even, not necessarily something beautiful, but maybe, you're struggling or you're not sure if you're going to get through the storm or whatever the
Yeah.
case. And it really, as I was reading Brother Lawrence, it made me think of that putting down tobacco, because it's just this momentary little thing that you do. It doesn't take much. It doesn't, take up a lot of time or anything.
Yeah.
Very simple, but it brings you back into sort of communion with the world around you and grounds you in the present moment.
Yeah.
And in my own life, I've been trying to find a Celtic way to sort of express that truth, which I learned. And so I've been making the sign of the cross, because it's something that I never grew up with and I never felt comfortable with, but which the ancient Celts and the medieval Celts certainly did. And I've been using it in the same way when I see a pretty sunset, or when I feel like I need some help, or any of those kinds of situations. And I find it grounds me back into that presence. And I was just wondering if you had any insights about using sort of embodied practices to connect with the presence. Brother Lawrence seems to do it just in his heart and mind, which is a perfectly good way to do it. But I find sometimes a tangible thing is helpful. Does that resonate with you at all?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I love the tobacco. I mean, from your background in the indigenous community. And I love also the cross. I know Alfred of Inisham, who I translated, definitely did the sign of the cross. So I think also definitely that is one of the things. I think probably also Brother Lawrence saw stirring the soup as that. If that I can't explain it, but I think he would have conceived of it that way. But I know what you mean, because sometimes we're human beings, and it helps to have a little extra something embodied. So for me, for example, going for a walk is one of the ways. Just having being fortunate to have the legs in motion and to be out in nature is one way. So I definitely think this is what I love about these paths, is they're very personalizable. And also we change. And so we do it one way one day and another way another day. So yeah, I actually think there are so many ways. Like I sometimes like to kneel at the end of my bed on a little cushion, not a cushion, but the thing you use in the garden, I use sometimes, and I'll kneel on it, or have kneeled like on the floor, the full prostration. And there's just something about the bodily element of it that is very educational without words. There's just something educational about, here I am on the floor. So yeah, I hear you. I think it's very valid. Absolutely. Yeah. In my experience. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I think we're coming to the end of our time now, but before we wrap up, I was hoping you could tell people where they can find your book. And you're leading some workshops about it too, right? Can you tell us a bit about those?
Oh yeah. So where they can find everything, and thank you for asking, is at either www.carmenbutcher.com or at Linktree, and that uses all three of my names, Carmen Acevedo Butcher. And either of those places also has links to workshops and stuff, like for Contemplative Outreach International, and for Keith Christich. He's having an interfaith also gathering, and some other things. So yeah, I would love to have people join in, and you know, the community of spiritual seekers is so really important. It's so diverse and so helpful to have people alongside each other. All of us really is helpful. So yeah, thanks. But they can also go to www.carmenbutcher.com, and it's at all bookstores everywhere.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Carmen. It's been lovely to chat with you.
Thank you, Justin. It's always a joy to be with you here.
For sure. Bye.
Bye.